The details for what Frontier has called the worst kept secret in the history of Elite Dangerous continue to leak. And before we get into the specifics, I want to thank the 400 of you who have voted in the poll asking and providing input on how to think about reporting on leaks going forward. And those of you who contributed, which might or might not be statistically representative of the roughly 90,000 people who tune in this channel every 3 months or so, about 4 in 5 have asked that I continue reporting on leaks, but 1 in 5 have also said that you would rather not have me do so. And while in every community, I think it's important to respect the will of the majority, I think it's equally important to also respect the prerogatives and the rights of minorities in such community as well. And I wholeheartedly share the belief that people who don't want to be spoiled have the right to not be spoiled. And as such, going forward, I have made the commitment that every time I report on spoilers and otherwise information that is not directly avoidable in game or from official sources, I will mark such information clearly as spoilers and leaks so that people who want to steer clear of such information can do so and avoid being spoiled if they don't intentionally want to be. So with that being said, now going forward in the rest of this video, if you remain tuned in, it means that you consent to being spoiled and that you understand the implications of getting access to that information. So moving on. And to be clear, this is all information that has been widely shared at this point. In fact, some of you who might be actively reading Reddit and other sources on Discord will might even say, well, how is this even news? Like, this has been circulating online for over a month at this point in time. And why are you reporting on it now? Well, I wanted to give Frontier Developments a chance to report and comment on this during the last Frontier Unlocked, but they didn't do so and instead punted it to over a month from now in the next Frontier Unlocked. So here we are. Like, they didn't talk about it, so now we talk about it. So what do we have on the Panther Mk2? Like, the first thing we have is a placeholder description, which talks about the absorbent impedance ship and its so-called incredible cargo capacity, its surprising armament, its polymer weave hull, and it also mentions, and this is a, by the way, great reminder that placeholder text and text that comes from memory dump, plain text string searches, as reported online, isn't always reliable. So you should take what we're talking about here with a grain of salt. And I'll try my best to talk about things that I think are more credible and less credible. It's clearly been stated at this point that the Panther Clipper Mk2 will be a large ship, so the placeholder text will be updated. But the incredible cargo capacity, the surprising armament, the drive stabilizers, and the polymer wheel hull are something worth exploring. Now, the first 3 of those, the cargo capacity, the armament, and the drive stabilizers, are kind of more intuitive, and we can get into that, and we'll get into that in a moment. The polymer weave hull is a new thing. We haven't heard about that much before. What does that mean? Does that mean that the ship is very light? Does it mean that it has a lot of hull hit points and armor? Does it mean that its armor hardness is surprisingly high? Or a combination of all of those things? That we really don't know, but we have some ideas and hypotheses, and we'll get to that in a moment. So, besides the placeholder text, what has been referenced to and what has emerged about the Panther Clipper overall? Well, the probably most reliable piece of information is that it will have 10 hardpoints. I remember seeing a Frontier employee say and mention this online somewhere. I can't remember if it was on X, if it was on the forums, if it was on Discord or elsewhere, but that has been pointed to by others as well. And in fact, I believe that post has been deleted at this point in time. And if anybody can actually help me find out the link to that deleted post, that'll be an interesting corroboration of this fact. But generally, I do recall, and I'll have to ask you to take my word for it, as unfortunately I don't have the pointing evidence to it, a Frontier employee stating that the Panther would have 10 hardpoints. Furthermore, online reports state that those 10 hardpoints will be 2 large, 4 medium, and 4 small, for a total of 10 hardpoints, which are actually plenty. Furthermore, it has 6 so-called tiny hardpoints. Tiny hardpoints are utilities. So this is a ship that will come with 6 utilities, 2 large, 4 medium, and 2 for small hardpoints. If this is true, and again, there's enough corroborating evidence to sort of suggest that it might well be true, What we'll have is a less combat-focused ship than a Type 10 Cutter or Anaconda, but more so than a Type 9 in a ship that clearly also has its distinguished characteristics elsewhere and the optional internals, as we'll get to in a minute. Nevertheless, with 6 medium to large hardpoints, it's a ship that can fit the maximum number of Guardian weapons, which is 6 with a Class 5 experimental weapon stabilizer, which means, depending on how weapon conversion looks like in the final ship, which is something that we don't know, it might be a ship that, at least from a firepower standpoint, is more than capable of holding its own. But we'll know more on that later on. The optional internals, what do we know about those? We know that there's 11 slots total, but the third one is a Class 7, that the 10th one is a Class 2, and that 11th one is a Class 1. Assuming that the first 2 are Class 8, which you would imagine, considering the ship is actually touted to be remarkable for its incredible cargo capacity, that would shake it down to roughly somewhere between 950 to 1,000 tons in overall capacity, depending on how you kind of mix up Class 7 and Class 6 and below modules in between those models that are currently listed, which would place it sort of notably higher and above the 768 or so tons that a Cutter and a Type 9 are able to haul, but not in the mind-boggling way that people throwing around thousands of tons of capacity somehow seem to suggest. Again, keep in mind, these are leaks developed based on what is currently in reports online of what people have studied, so they may or may not turn out to be true at all. And this one in particular has my head scratching a little bit, because the screenshots of the Panther Clipper Mk2 show that it has essentially 4 cargo holds nested inside in the middle of a hull. And in my mind, it was like, well, either this is just purely a design thing, but if it's not purely like a design visual thing, I would have imagined those to be like 4 Class 8 cargo hold slots equivalent. So it would have originally have guessed that the ship would have come with 4 Class 8 cargo holds. But again, as I mentioned, that's not what the current data in the file suggests. It seems to be that there's only no more than 2 Class 8 slots, and the rest are 7 and lower. But we shall see. This is one that I think might evolve quite a bit. In terms of core internals, what's current in the file suggests a Class 8 power plant, Class 8 thrusters, a Class 7 FSD, and we'll get to that in a moment, Class 5 life support, a Class 7 power distributor, which places it in the category of the Cutter, and short of the and of the Type 10, but short of the Anaconda and short of the Federal Corvette, which are, I believe, the only 2 ships that have a Class 8 power distributor. Let me double check that to make sure I'm talking correctly. Yep, what I said is correct. The Type 10 actually has a Class 7 as well. And then surprisingly small sensors, I will say, of only Class 5. Again, in contrast, with Anaconda has Class 8 sensors. So if this is true, and again, it may be subject to change, but if this is true, what we'll get is a ship that has good power grid, that is very fast for a large ship. Like, keep in mind, the only other ship to have Class 8 thrusters is the Imperial Cutter, and the Imperial Cutter is pretty freaking fast for a large ship. So even though this ship ought to be heavier, or at least carrying more cargo than a Cutter, owing to having Class 8 thrusters, assuming its solid polymer wheel hull is reasonably light and doesn't weight it down immensely, then it should be closer to the Cutter in terms of speed than to the Type 9 or Type 10, which are notably slower. Same for a Anaconda. The power distributor of Class 7, as I mentioned, like, positions it in the Cutter category, so this won't be as big of a combat ship as the Anaconda or Corvette, which have a Class 8 power distributor and thus a better ability to power all those hardpoints. But it's not bad. Like, it places it in the Cutter category and the same as a Corsair. But it does place it in the same category as a Corsair, so bear that in mind. Presumably, the Corsair will be a lot more agile than the ship, or is a lot more agile than this ship will be, to be more exact. The Class 5 sensors are really a question mark in my head, because, like, I don't think any ship, even remotely close to this big, like, I think, well, that's not exactly true. I'm kind of looking at this, and the Type 9 has class 4 sensors, and the Beluga has class 5 sensors. So there is, I guess, a precedent of having big ships with kind of smaller sensor size. It's not that crippling in the end of the day. It's just something that, for a modern ship, it surprises me. I would have guessed sensors were going to be somewhat larger for this ship, but at least apparently, according to this data, not. So that's what we got, guys. As I mentioned, please bear in mind that these are leaked information that has been circulating for about a month now. You can find it on Reddit, you can find it on Discord, you can find it pretty much everywhere. And that's the sources I use to report on these. Again, we won't really know the specifics about Panther Clipper until Frontier chooses to announce them and talk about them in the next Frontier Unlocked in the next month. So we'll stay tuned for that event. In the meanwhile, the way of mankind. Hope this was useful. Mechan, over and out.